My name is Jessica, and if there's one thing I've learned living in America, it's that money is power. I live in a three-story house on the edge of Denver, Colorado, a house I built brick by brick through years of sacrifice. I didn't inherit wealth. I didn't have parents who supported me. Every square inch of my home, the polished oak floors, the stone fireplace, even the worn leather armchair in the corner of my study, was earned through long nights and brutal deadlines. That house was more than just wood and stone. It was proof that I could rise above the games my family always played with me. But all it took was one phone call for my mother to turn my sanctuary into a prison of rage. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. I remember because I had just finished reviewing a client's investment portfolio and was preparing to drive to a meeting downtown. My phone buzzed, and when I saw my mother's name flashing across the screen, my gut tightened. She rarely called unless she needed something, and this time was no different. Her voice was unusually cheerful, almost playful. "Jessica," she said, dragging out my name like it was a joke. "Guess what? We emptied your American Express Gold card." She started laughing before I could even process the words. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice sharp. Her laughter grew louder, crueler, cutting through me like a knife. "Oh, don't pretend you don't know. $99,000, Jessica. All for Amanda's trip to Hawaii. First-class flights, the best hotels, shopping, spa treatments, you name it, she got it. We decided to punish you for hiding that money from us. You thought you could keep secrets from your own family? You cheap girl." I froze, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. My throat felt dry, but somehow the words pushed through. "Don't regret it later," I said quietly, each syllable measured cold. There was a pause, and then she laughed again. That cruel, mocking laugh that I'd known since childhood. She hung up before I could say another word. For a moment, the silence in my house was suffocating. I could hear the tick of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each second pounding in my head. $99,000. Gone. Not stolen by strangers, but taken by my own parents for my sister's vacation. My vision blurred with rage. The betrayal wasn't just financial, it was personal, deep, and deliberate. This wasn't about the money. This was about control. My parents had always treated Amanda as the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. She was younger, prettier, and spoiled rotten. My father, Michael, called her his princess. My mother, Caroline, made excuses for every mistake she made. Meanwhile, I was the one expected to work hard, to be responsible, to keep the family afloat when bills piled up or debts came knocking. For years, I paid their overdue mortgage installments, their credit card balances, even Amanda's reckless spending sprees. And yet, they still saw me as nothing more than a wallet they could empty whenever they pleased. But this time was different. This wasn't a couple of $1,000s here and there. This was nearly $100,000, money I had set aside for my future, for a property investment in Boston I'd been eyeing for months. They hadn't just stolen from me. They'd crippled my plans. My mother's mocking words replayed in my mind on a loop. "We emptied your card. It's your punishment." Punishment. As if I were a child. As if my independence were some kind of crime. The anger that rose in me was unlike anything I had felt before. It wasn't the hot, fleeting anger of an argument. It was cold, heavy, deliberate. The kind of anger that makes you sit still, silent, while the fire builds inside. I paced the rooms of my house like a caged animal. Every photograph on the wall seemed to mock me. There was one of me at 21, standing beside Amanda on her graduation day. She was glowing, showered with gifts and flowers, while I stood slightly behind, half forgotten in the frame. There was another of my parents smiling in front of their suburban house in Chicago, the house I had secretly helped pay for when they couldn't keep up with the mortgage. My eyes burned as I stared at them, realizing that everything I had ever given was taken for granted. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the faint hum of the refrigerator the only sound in the house. I poured myself a glass of whiskey, the burn down my throat matching the fire in my chest. My laptop sat open in front of me, the American Express account screen still glowing. The number, $99,000, was like a scar burned into the screen. I thought about calling the credit card company, disputing the charges, maybe even involving the police. But then I remembered my mother's laughter. I remembered the smug tone in her voice when she said it was a punishment. And I realized that this wasn't about recovering the money. No, this was about revenge. They thought they had humiliated me, stripped me of power. What they didn't understand was that I had spent years building my life without them, learning how money moved, how banks worked, how investments grew. I wasn't the naive daughter they thought I was. I had knowledge, I had connections, and most importantly, I had the will to strike back. The aggression coursed through me, settling into something sharp and focused. I began drafting plans in my mind. My father prided himself on his investments, the stocks and properties he bragged about to anyone who would listen. My mother had her little gambling habits, debts she thought I didn't know about. And Amanda, well, Amanda's whole life was a house of cards built on lies, credit, and appearances. All it would take was one push, and their worlds would collapse. As the first rays of dawn broke over Denver, I stood at the window of my house, clutching my whiskey glass. The city was waking up, unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. My parents and Amanda had chosen the battleground when they stole from me. What they didn't know was that I wasn't coming to negotiate. I was coming for blood. For the first time in years, I felt something like clarity. Revenge wasn't just an option, it was a necessity. And I promised myself that when I was finished, they wouldn't just regret emptying my credit card. They would regret underestimating me. When my family returned from their luxury trip to Hawaii, I was waiting at the door of my Denver home. I forced a smile, one of those polished masks I had learned to wear in business meetings, but inside my mind was already a battlefield. My father, Michael, swaggered past me with his glass of bourbon in hand, as if he owned the place. My sister Amanda pranced behind him, draped in gaudy jewelry that I had no doubt been bought with my money. And my mother, Caroline, strolled in with a grin that dripped with arrogance. Not one of them looked guilty. Not one of them cared that they had stolen nearly $100,000 from me. Jessica, my father said, his voice booming as though he were a king returning from war. You should have seen the view from our hotel. Nothing in Denver compares. He smirked, sipping his bourbon, leaving a trail of entitlement in every word. Amanda twirled, showing off a diamond bracelet. Isn't it stunning? Only $12,000. But don't worry, sis, it was worth every penny of your card. She giggled, mocking me. My blood boiled. They thought I would cry. They thought I would collapse into myself and pay off the debt quietly, like the dutiful daughter they had trained me to be. But that Jessica was gone. I was no longer the silent financier of their lifestyles. I had grown sharper, colder. This time, they weren't facing a victim. They were facing a storm. That night, I retreated to my study, the one room in the house they never entered. The heavy mahogany desk was littered with papers, and I began my work. My rage gave me clarity, my anger transformed into strategy. I opened files, bank records, and old documents I had quietly collected over the years. They thought their secrets were safe. They had no idea how much I already knew. Michael, my father, had hidden investments in London, portfolios that he never reported to anyone, not even my mother. He thought he was clever, funneling money through shell companies in Europe, boasting about his financial genius to his poker buddies. But I had the records. I knew where every dollar sat. One signature from me, and those accounts could be frozen. Amanda, my perfect little sister, wasn't perfect at all. She strutted around like royalty, but her entire college history was a lie. She had faked student loan applications, fabricated documents to milk extra money, and when she wasn't scamming banks, she was leaning on me to cover her unpaid balances. She had built her life on credit and deception. If I pulled the right thread, her entire world would unravel in public disgrace. And Caroline, my sweet, laughing mother, was drowning in secret gambling debts. Casinos in Las Vegas knew her by name. She owed nearly $50,000 to men who didn't forgive or forget. She thought she could hide it from me, from everyone, but I had phone recordings, statements, and enough proof to hand her over to collectors who would make her regret every spin of the roulette wheel. I pinned the documents on the wall of my study, piece by piece, until it looked like a war map. Every connection, every weakness, every sin was marked in red ink. My house had transformed into a command center, and I was its general. For the first time in years, I felt the weight shift in my favor. The fire inside me grew stronger. Still, revenge is not simply striking blindly. It is patience, calculation, and timing. I began reaching out to my contacts in New York, people who owed me favors from years of consulting work. Daniel, a financial lawyer I had once helped, warned me, "Jessica, if you go through with this, you'll ruin them. Your own family." I smirked, my voice steady and cold. That's the point. Daniel hesitated, but he owed me, and soon enough, I had the legal documents I needed to take control of my father's accounts. Step one of my revenge was already falling into place. But I didn't stop there. I called another contact, a journalist named Rachel in Chicago. Rachel lived for stories of scandal, especially those that exposed corruption. I told her about Amanda's fake loans, every detail supported by the evidence I had gathered. Her excitement over the phone was almost contagious. "If this checks out, Jessica, your sister will be headline news within the week." That thought made me smile for the first time in days. My golden sister, humiliated in public, stripped of her carefully curated image. As for Caroline, I didn't need lawyers or journalists for her. I needed only silence. I made one phone call to a casino manager in Las Vegas, sliding the evidence of her debts across the table. I told him where she lived, when she would be home, and that I had no intention of protecting her. I could almost picture the knock on her door, the fear in her eyes when she realized her luck had run out. With every step, the aggression in me sharpened into purpose. They had chosen war when they laughed in my face. Now I would give them war, a war they couldn't win. The next evening, I stood at the window of my Denver home, looking out over the glowing city. My family sat in the living room behind me, laughing as if nothing had happened, as if I were still their silent provider. Amanda scrolled on her phone, posting pictures of her Hawaiian trip to Instagram. Michael was on his third glass of bourbon, bragging about his investments to anyone who would listen. Caroline was humming to herself, flipping through a fashion magazine. They were oblivious. They didn't know their empire was already crumbling, piece by piece. I clenched my fists, feeling the cold determination in my veins. This wasn't just about reclaiming what was mine. This was about making them bleed the way I had bled for years. This was about turning their arrogance into ashes. As the night wore on, I returned to my study, staring at the war map I had built. Red lines connected every sin, every debt, every secret. It was beautiful in its own way, a tapestry of their destruction. And at the center of it all was me, Jessica, the daughter they underestimated, the sister they mocked, the woman they betrayed. I whispered to myself, my voice steady and venomous. "You took $99,000 from me. I'll take everything from you." And in that moment, I knew there was no turning back. When I left Denver for New York, I carried nothing but a single suitcase and the fire that had been raging inside me since the day of that phone call. To the rest of the world, it might have looked like a business trip, but I knew better. This was war, and New York would be my first battlefield. The city's sharp skyline rose into the night as my plane touched down, a perfect reflection of the razor-edged thoughts in my mind. Every step I took through JFK Airport felt deliberate, like a drumbeat leading me toward vengeance. I wasn't here to visit, to sightsee, or to lose myself in the crowds. I was here to dismantle my family piece by piece. Daniel met me in his office the next morning. He was a financial lawyer, the kind of man who thrived on knowing other people's secrets. His office in Manhattan was all glass and steel, perched high above the streets where taxis blared and people shouted. He looked at me with a mix of admiration and hesitation when I laid out the files on his desk. "Jessica," he said slowly, flipping through the documents that revealed every detail of my father's London accounts, "if you move forward with this, you'll ruin him completely. We're talking about £500,000 tied up in these portfolios. Once they're frozen, he'll be crippled." I leaned forward, my voice like ice. "That's the point." He thought he could take 99,000 from me without consequence. He laughed while doing it. Let's see if he laughs when London shuts its doors on him. Daniel exhaled, tapping his pen against the desk. For a moment, I thought he might refuse, but then he nodded. All right, let's bury him. By noon, the paperwork was in motion. Within days, my father's investments, worth nearly £450,000, were locked down. Every call he made to London banks would be answered with silence. Every transaction would bounce. I could already imagine his rage as he discovered his empire was crumbling from a distance, his precious bourbon glass slipping from his hand. The thought made my lips curl into the first genuine smile I had allowed myself in weeks. But I wasn't finished.
My sister Amanda was next.
I had already gathered the evidence of her fake student loans, documents she forged, payments she lied about, accounts she never should have opened. Amanda always carried herself as though the rules didn't apply to her, as though her charm could erase every sin. Well, charm doesn't work when your name is dragged across headlines. I called Rachel, the journalist in Chicago. I have a story for you, I said, my voice steady, controlled. One that involves fraud, lies, and the daughter of Michael and Caroline. Rachel perked up immediately. Send me what you have. Within days, Amanda's carefully curated life unraveled. The board at Columbia was informed of her fraudulent loans. Her name hit the papers, each headline cutting deeper into the image she had built. Columbia student exposed for loan fraud. Daughter of prominent investor under investigation. I imagined her scrolling through her phone, her face pale as her reputation collapsed in front of her thousands of followers. For once, the golden child was covered in mud, and I was the one who pushed her face into it. Still, I wasn't done. My mother Caroline had laughed the hardest during that phone call, her voice dripping with mockery. I wanted to carve that laugh out of her throat. I knew about her gambling debts, nearly $50,000 owed to Las Vegas casinos, the kind of debt that attracts the wrong kind of collectors. All it took was one phone call from me, a quiet conversation with a casino manager who remembered her all too well. She's back in Denver now, I told him. You'll find her at the family house. She thinks she can run from her debt. I hung up, picturing the knock on her door, the cold sweat on her skin, as she realized the wolves were at her heels. For years she thought I was too weak, too cheap, too quiet to strike back. She would learn quickly that I wasn't weak anymore. From Denver to New York to London to Las Vegas, my revenge rippled across America and Europe like a storm. Every step was deliberate, every strike fueled by the arrogance of my family. They had treated me like an endless source of money, like a servant meant to suffer in silence. But now the silence was over. One night, as I sat in my hotel room in New York, I watched the city lights glitter against the darkness. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and let the burn remind me of the fire in my chest. I thought about Michael, pounding his fists on his desk in Denver as he realized his investments had vanished into legal limbo. I thought about Amanda, hiding from cameras as reporters swarmed her with questions about her fraud. I thought about Caroline, flinching at every sound outside her window, knowing collectors could arrive at any moment. Revenge wasn't just about payback anymore. It was about power. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one being used. I was the one pulling the strings, and I reveled in it. The aggression that had burned inside me since that phone call now had an outlet, and I wasn't planning to stop until there was nothing left of the people who had mocked me. I closed my eyes and let the silence of the room sink in. This was only the beginning. I had dismantled their finances, their reputations, their security. But I wasn't satisfied yet. No, satisfaction would come when they looked me in the eyes and realized it was me, Jessica, the daughter they underestimated, the sister they mocked, the woman they betrayed, who had destroyed everything they valued. When I opened my eyes, the war map in my mind was still there, glowing red with their sins. My fists tightened around the glass. America had felt my fury, Europe had tasted my reach, and soon my family would come face to face with the storm I had become. I whispered to myself in the dark, my voice steady and venomous. This is only the beginning. The night I invited them back to my Denver house was heavy with silence. Outside, the sky stretched black over the city, and the streets glowed with the hum of distant headlights. Inside, I lit no candles, played no music, offered no warmth. My house was no longer a home. It was a throne room, a battlefield, and a courtroom all at once. I had told them nothing in advance. My message was simple: come to the house. We need to talk. That was all. I knew curiosity and fear would pull them here. By the time the doorbell rang, my war was already won. I opened the door to find them standing there, stripped of the arrogance they once flaunted. My father, Michael, trembled without his bourbon, his proud shoulders bent as though the weight of the world had finally pressed him down. Amanda's designer dress hung awkwardly, her eyes hollow from the endless calls from reporters. The shame of her fraud splashed across every screen. And Caroline, my mother, my betrayer, had lost the cruel laugh she had once used to mock me. Her hands twitched at her sides, her eyes darting nervously, as though she expected collectors to step out from the shadows. They stepped into my house, but they weren't my family anymore. They were my captives. Sit, I commanded, pointing toward the living room. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight they couldn't ignore. They obeyed. For once in their lives, they obeyed me. I moved slowly, deliberately, taking my seat across from them. I leaned back, crossing my legs, and let my silence stretch out like a blade hovering above their throats. Finally, I spoke. You stole from me, I said, my voice cold, steady. So, I took everything you valued. No one spoke. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each second a reminder of how far we had fallen from the days when they laughed and mocked me. I studied their faces, the hollow shells of arrogance, and I felt no pity. You thought I would collapse, I continued. You thought I would hide under your shadow, keep paying your debts, keep covering your mistakes. But I don't bow anymore. You emptied my credit card. You laughed in my face. That was the moment you declared war. My father clenched his fists, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. Jessica, you don't understand, he muttered. Those accounts in London are gone. I cut in sharply. Frozen. £500,000, locked where you'll never touch them again. The empire you bragged about is dust now. Your so-called genius investments? Nothing more than paperwork rotting in a file. His jaw tightened, but he had no answer. He knew it was true. I turned my gaze to Amanda, who tried to shrink into herself. And you, I hissed. Miss Golden Child. Miss Perfect. How does it feel, Amanda, to see your name dragged through the mud? How does it feel to have your face on headlines, not as the princess of this family, but as a fraud, a liar? Every loan you faked, every lie you told, it's all out there now. You can't charm your way out of this one. You can't hide behind your looks anymore. The world sees you for what you are. Her lips trembled, but no words came out. Her phone buzzed in her purse, reporters no doubt calling for another quote, another humiliation. She ignored it. For once, Amanda had no performance left in her. Then I turned to Caroline. My mother, the woman who had mocked me most cruelly, who had laughed on the phone as she told me they had drained my card. I leaned forward, my eyes narrowing. And you, I whispered, venom dripping from every word. Do you still laugh now? Do you still find it funny, knowing Las Vegas is waiting for you? Do you still think it's a game, knowing men will come knocking for that $50,000 you owe? Her face paled, her lips pressing into a thin line. She knew the answer. The fear in her eyes was all the confession I needed. For a long moment, silence swallowed the room. I let them sit in it, let them squirm under the weight of their defeat. This was more than revenge. This was justice. For years, I had been their victim. For years, I had been their wallet, their scapegoat, their shadow. But not anymore. Now I was their judge, their executioner. I gave you warnings, I said softly, almost too soft. When you stole from me, I told you not to regret it later. You laughed. You thought I was weak. But you were wrong. You underestimated me, and now you're nothing. I stood, walking slowly across the room, my heels striking the floor like a drumbeat of finality. I paused in front of the fireplace, looking at the framed photographs that once represented family. Smiling faces, happy moments, all lies, all illusions. I reached up, took one frame in my hands, and let it crash to the floor. The glass shattered, sharp and final. They flinched, but I didn't look back at them. I kept my gaze on the flames that flickered in the fireplace. "This house," I said, "is mine. Every wall, every brick, every memory, it belongs to me. You laughed at me once inside these walls, but now you sit here defeated. My house is no longer your shelter. It is my throne. And from this throne, I will make sure you never rise again." My father shifted, his voice breaking. "Jessica, please. We're family." I turned then, my eyes like steel. "Family?" I spat the word like poison. "Family doesn't steal. Family doesn't mock. Family doesn't punish one daughter for daring to succeed. You were never my family. You were parasites. And I finally cut you off." Amanda sobbed quietly. Caroline sat in silence, and Michael stared at the floor. The balance of power had shifted permanently. I wasn't the cheap girl they mocked. I wasn't the silent provider anymore. I was the storm that had stripped them of their wealth, their pride, and their illusions. I walked to the door, holding it open. "Get out," I ordered. They hesitated, but they knew better than to argue. One by one, they stood and shuffled out into the night, broken and humiliated. I watched them go, my chest heaving not with sorrow, but with satisfaction. When the door clicked shut behind them, I leaned against it, letting the silence wash over me. For the first time in my life, the house didn't feel like a burden. It didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a fortress. My fortress. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat in my chair by the window, gazing out at the Denver skyline. The war was over, and I had won. Revenge hadn't just returned what they stole, it had given me back my power. And in America, I had learned one undeniable truth. Power doesn't come from love or loyalty. It comes from money, from control, from the ability to destroy those who dare to cross you. I raised my glass to the night. "To victory," I whispered. And with that, I claimed my throne.